Okay, so welcome to this class. A lot of you told me that they couldn't come and join at 1 p.m. So we're starting and we will record this class for all of you who want to follow. We're going to start by dedicating this class for the Refuah Shelema of Daniel Meir Ben Pnina, Jessie Hannah Bat Patricia, Shira Yafa Bat Sarah, Talia Yaakov Ben Sarah, Yirmiyahu Ben Devorah, Yosef Ishai Ben Daniel Miriam, all the Cholim of Am Israel, and the protection of our Chayalim and Chatufim. Be'ezrat Hashem. We'll just go fast on. We'll read number 20. למנצר מזמור לדוד, ירנך אדוני ביום שרץ וגבך השם אלוהי יעקב, ישלח עזריך מקודש ומציון יסעדיך, יזכור כמחותיך ועולתך ידש נסלה, ייתן לך כלבביך וכל עצתך ימלא, נרננה בישועתך ושם אלוהינו נתגול, ימלא אדוני כל משאלותיך, עתה ידעתי כי יושר אדוני משיחו, ירנהו משמי קודשו בגבורות ישע ימינו, ולברכי ולבסוסים ואנחנו בשם אדוני אלוהינו נזכיר, המה קראו ונפלו, ואנחנו קמנו ונתעודד אדוני יושירה המלך יעננו ביום קראנו. Okay, so last week we skipped the class, and this week we are going to do like a brief summary of what we learned in our second class, right? Just to refresh our mind. So basically, up to now, what do we know? We know that Achashverosh was the king of 127 nations, right? We know that he was suffering from what we call the imposter syndrome, right? Because he did not conquer the empire. The truth is that he bought the countries, the nations, right? With the money that he didn't even earn, but that he found miraculously, let's say, okay? So hazardously, and again, like this is interesting because we said at the first class that what we are going to try to understand with the Megillah is that there is no mikre, there is no hazard, there is no coincidence. Everything has been designed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything is hashgacha pratit. But here again, we see a king who almost hazardously found a treasure, right? And it raised him to the title of king, because with that treasure and with that wealth, he was able to buy 127 nations and become the king of that empire, right? But the problem is, as an individual, he's desperately looking for recognition and legitimacy in the eyes of his empire, because he knows what's behind. He needs to feel powerful. He needs to feel that he's entitled of the title of king, right? So what is he going to do? We said last time, he's going to throw 2 banquets, but one of them is going to last for 6 months, right? First, what was he trying to celebrate in that banquet? He wanted to celebrate the defeat of the Jewish people, because we remember that he had miscounted the 70 years of the prophecy, right? Of the return of the end of the exile of Babylon. And therefore, he said, okay, their God abandoned them. It's great. The Jewish people are defeated. But second reason why he threw that banquet was because he wanted to prove his legitimacy as a king, right? And we said that after 180 days of partying, showing off his wealth and everything, he still misses his objective. And why? He will not be able to prove to anyone that he is the king because of his queen, Vashti, who is really entitled of that royalty title of queen, right? She is royalty. And what happens? She refuses to obey her husband, right? Even though he is the king. And that creates a very big problem for him, because not only he's not legitimate as a king, but he's not even powerful within his marriage. So now we have this Achashverosh in this situation, right? Where we know that he has this syndrome, this imposter syndrome, that he feels illegitimate. And he tries desperately to buy the nations, the 127 countries, by creating this extravagant party during 6 months. And at the end of those 6 months, what happens? Everything is thrown to the garbage because of that queen. So what are we going to do with that? Now that's regarding Achashverosh. And we also have to remember, even though we're not going to speak so much about the Yehudim today, about the Jewish people today, but for next week with the chapter 2, we will approach now the Yehudim. But we still know that that context in which the Megillah takes place is a context where the Yehudim have been exiled, right? They experience the destruction of their Bet HaMikdash. You have to imagine the pain. Imagine the pain that we are feeling now when Israel, Eretz Israel, is threatened, is attacked, right? Is in war. Imagine how it was to have to experience the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash, which was the place where Hashem was dwelling, which was the place that we had invested in. Each and every Yid, each and every Jew had put something of himself inside of that Bet HaMikdash and previously on the Mishkan. And sorry, and we see all that disappear in flame. And not only that, but on top of that, we are forced to be exiled in Babylon, right? So we have a population of Jews who are not yet named Jews, by the way. It's during the event of Purim that they will get that title. And they are in a state of despair and of hopelessness, right? Okay. So now I sent you on the chat the text of the Megillah. And we are going to go through, to go back to verse 13. That's where we left last time, right? And when we left at verse 13 last time, Vashti refused to obey the king. And then the verse says that the king will say to the wise men who knew the times that the matter of the king should be brought before those who knew the practice and law. So, in order to prepare this series, I used the Malbim, which is a contemporary commentator, contemporary from the 19th century, and he explains. So he goes like, he questions, and then he explains, and it's very interesting the way he proceeds. So he's asking, who are the wise men who knew the times? And why is it so important that they knew the times? Then we see also that it says, who are those who knew practice and law? What does it mean exactly? And then we'll see in verse 15 that Achashverosh will ask that Vashti should be only judged by those who know the laws. So we'll see what it means, right? The Malbim explains and reveals the signification of all that. So usually the trial of someone who didn't obey the king would be different whether the person is an ordinary person, right? Or someone of the same rank as the king. So the one against the king would be judged by the one against the king. So the one who offended the king would be judged by permanent judges before that. So the wise men who knew the times are those who take into account when did the offense took place. For instance, if the king was on his throne, then when he was offended, right, then there would be a more severe and harsh punishment, right? Because he was representing the royalty. He was on his throne. So it was in this position, in this context, disobeying the king was even worse, right? But if it happened when all the nobles of the empire were present, which means that he was on his throne, he was in his title of king, and it was a public disobedience, in that case, the punishment would be even more difficult, stricter, right? But imagine the contrary. Imagine that on the contrary, when the trial is between two ordinary people, now we have two ordinary people or people of the same rank. They didn't need to use the judges who knew the times, because basically it would always be in the same context of two people who disrespect each other, but there was not a need to know whether, like it was when the king was reigning, when he was in a public situation, etc. So in that case, when it was between two people of the same rank, the judges would only be the one who knew practice and law, okay? And obviously, why is it so interesting? Because we know that there is a question. The person who disobeyed is the queen. Is she from the same rank or not? Are we going to consider her an equal to the king or not? We know that she is the queen, and she really has a royal legacy, contrary to that king. So it's going to be interesting to understand that. In verse 13, we see that Ahasuerus didn't want Vashti to face death penalty. That's why he said to the wise men who knew the time, you know what? No need to bring the case to you. So we see that Ahasuerus, he doesn't really want to kill Vashti. That's not his plan. At the end, like she's a good queen. She didn't obey him, but we can be lenient. Why killing her? No. Let's understand that we are equals. So we don't need to bring those who knew the times, right? Let's stick to the regular trial, to those who knew practice and law. The queen is no ordinary people, and therefore it should be not judged as a regular person who would have offended the king, right? That's how he feels. And somehow we see that Ahasuerus didn't want Vashti to be punished for what she has done. Is it a proof of his weakness? Because an all-powerful king would maybe not have judged this way. He would have been more harsh. We can imagine that if they are judging like two ordinary people, then Vashti could even have been acquitted, because Persian women at that time were known to be very modest, right? And they were living confined in their women's world, let's say, or in their chambers, in their house. So any judge would have probably understood and even justified that a wife would feel ridiculized, right? To be brought up in public naked. So if the judgment had been based on practice, Vashti could have been acquitted. Therefore, we understand also why in the verse 15, that we're going to see in a few minutes, we're going to see that it says, according to practice, what should be done to Queen Vashti. That's what Ahasuerus is saying. He's asking, I don't want her to be killed. I know there is a way out, that she can be acquitted if we are judged like two equal people from practice and not from law. Okay? So here we see a certain weakness of King Ahasuerus. Now, let's go to verse 14. So it says, the closest to him were Karshena, Shelter, Admata, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memuchan, the 7 officials, princes of Persia and Media, who regularly saw the king and who sat first in the kingdom. So why is it, we understand it's important to have their name, but why the closest to him? Why is it so important to mention that they were the closest to him, and what does it reveal? And why is there 3 designation of their closeness, right? So the Malbim reveals something interesting. He says, we understand that Ahasuerus wants to save his wife, right? The life of his wife. So he shows that it is a domestic issue between husband and wife. And therefore, he's going to choose 7 officials. Those 7 officials for 4 reasons. First, because they were the closest to him, which means that they would respect the privacy of a domestic matter and would not put it public, right? Then they were the officials of Persia and Media, which means that they were of appropriate rank, right, to judge the case. We could not take any judge to judge the case of a queen and a king in an equal trial, right? Third reason, they regularly saw the king. What does it mean? It means that they knew his gestures and they could read into him. Remember, we are in the Megillah, meaning that he also, King Ahasuerus here is saying, you know, when I'm making some face, you know what it means. I don't even need to say it. I can just show it on my face. You know me so well, you're going to know that I don't want her to be punished harshly, right? So that's why there were the people, the officials who saw the king regularly, because they would understand, without needing to be said, that his objective was for his wife to be acquitted, right? And why also the fourth reason is that they sat first in the kingdom, which means that they had been there for a long time and had a lot of experience. They sat first in the kingdom. They were there for a long time. They knew the king, they knew the environment, they knew the rules, and they could judge the case respectfully. Okay. Now, there is one of those princes of Persia that is called Memuchan, and this one is going to be the one who will influence the king a lot in all his decisions. And actually, this Memuchan, he has a real strategy. He has an agenda. And he's trying to manipulate the king to get to his personal agenda. Now let's think about who is Memuchan. Many commentators, including Rashi, will say that Memuchan is one of the titles of Haman. But because we are in the Megillah and that not everything is revealed, the name of Haman will not appear before chapter 3. We're still in chapter 1. So why is that the narration would not mention his real name and use Memuchan instead? Because, as we said, it needs to be revealed little by little, because there is in this hiddenness, we're going to discover something very special, but also because in the Hebrew word Memuchan, it means prepared or ready, right? So when Haman is mentioned as Memuchan, right, it suggests that he was a trusted and prepared advisor for King Ahasuerus. So that's one more detail, hidden detail about Haman. So now let's go to verse 15. I'm going to read the translation. To decide according to practice what should be done with Queen Vashti for not performing the the bidding of the king conveyed by the chamberlains. So why conveyed by the chamberlains, right? Sorry. So Achashverosh, here he's saying again, we have to remember he wants to his queen to be acquitted, right? So he wants to underline 2 points here in this verse. First, she was not a commoner. How do we know? He doesn't call her Vashti, the queen, as we mentioned in the second class. When he calls her Queen Vashti, it's to show that she is a queen. We're speaking about the title, the royalty in her, right? So even though it was a marital dispute between husband and wife, she is not a commoner. She's the queen, right? And second, her refusal is understandable, since it would have been even more humiliating for her to have been brought naked by the lowly chamberlains. Remember that he asked that. So that makes it even more understandable that she disobeyed. He really wants her to be saved. He doesn't want her to go through a harsh judgment. But he's going to be manipulated by someone. We'll see that. Verse 16. And Memucan replied in front of the king and the other officials, not only has Vashti the queen, wronged the king, but also all the officials and all the people in all the provinces of King Achashverosh. So first, just a remark, here we see Vashti the queen. He saw that he's trying to put up the royalty in that Achashverosh is trying to put up the royalty as like a way to defend her. It's even more humiliating for her. She's a queen and she would have been brought naked by those chamberlains. So he's going to accuse her. He's going to place her as Vashti the queen. We're not speaking about the queen here. We're speaking about your wife, right? Mm-hmm. And she wronged you in front of everyone. Okay, so in this way, like he really starts destroying the arguments of leniency that the king is trying to put up. Okay, so let's
Esther, Esther, sorry, I'm gonna switch to my computer.
Sure.
So I'm just gonna turn off my video, but I can hear you. I just have to flip to my other.
No problem.
WhatsApp. Yeah. Okay.
I'm just going to up.
I'm just copying it.
Okay, so now we're going to, so Memucan, who is actually Haman, understood the objective of Achashverosh, right? So he's trying to dismantle that. And he's going to say, to try to bring up that she did so in front of the king and the officials. He shows that it is not a private matter, but one that affected the honor of the entire kingdom, right? All the people from all the provinces. Her crime will also impact all the provinces. Wait a second, king. You think you're going to excuse her behavior? We're not speaking about a private matter here. It has been in front of the officials and in front of all the people from all the provinces. Her crime will also impact all the empire. Memucan is really up. I'm going to let you in. Memucan is really trying to slowly dismantle the defense of King Achashverosh, right? Now, verse 17. For this deed of the queen will go out to all women and will cause them to hold their husbands in contempt, saying that even King Achashverosh told Vashti, the queen, to be brought before him, but she did not come. So why should the queen die merely because wives will not respect their husbands? Why just passing a law that husbands should rule in their homes. So Memucan, Haman, now develops his strategy. Wait a second, Vashti's crime would impact all the people, and it's going to ruin all the marriages throughout the empire. The women present at that banquet, those from the high society, would know that Vashti disobeyed for their legitimate reasons. But those from the public, the people who were not here, what will they believe? They will just hear that the queen disobeyed the king and was acquitted for that. And it will give green light to all the women to reproduce that in their house. Oh my God. Right? And it's funny because we'll see in the following chapters, that Haman, who is hiding behind that name of Memucan, actually had Shalom Bayit issues. So his personal agenda here is to make sure that his wife will not be authorized legally to dominate him anymore.
It's true. It was always his wife. I've forgotten her name now, but she's always challenging, why aren't you doing this? And why aren't you doing that? And yeah.
She is the manipulator behind it. And he wants to stop that. And you're going to see, he's going to make it happen very smartly. So in verse 18, this very day, the wives of the officials of Persia and Media who heard the queen's response will speak to all the king's officials, causing much contempt and fury. So this very day, what will their wives say? And why is it written contempt and fury? In who will that happen? So the Malbim explains. Memucan points out now that all the officials' wives were present at the banquet, right? They all heard her response that very same day. That very same day when they heard that response, the wives will show contempt to their husbands. And their husbands, who are the officials, will be in fury against the king.
Mm.
Again, he's thinking about himself. Mm-hmm. Wow, there's no way that my wife is going to be content to me or is going to rebel against me because of you, king. There's no way, right? Verse 19. If it please the king, let a royal edict be issued from him to be written as one of the permanent rules of Persia and Media, that Vashti never again appears before King Ahasuerus, and that the king should give her royal estate to another woman better than her. So Haman, Memucan, however we call him, showed and tried to prove to the king how wrong Vashti's doings were, right? He really drew a terrible picture of all the consequences for the entire population, not only for the king, but for the entire population of the empire, as well also as the closest environment of the kings. All the officials will also be touched and impacted by that. And now he's underlining the fact that if the extraordinary banquet had been thrown in the objective to show the nations his greatness, his legitimacy as a king, his wealth, his power, right? Now, in just a few seconds, Vashti made this plan fail. Mm-hmm. And he's now seen actually as a king who is not even respected in his own image. His wife is not even respecting him. Why? Maybe because he's not true royalty at the end, right? So it touches him in his feeling of being illegitimate. Memucan really hits his target right now. He touches this sensitive chord of King Ahasuerus. He knows that he needs that recognition, that legitimacy. And now that he finished his demonstrations, he's going to come up with a plan, with a solution. So first, he's going to suggest how the king could achieve his ambition of unlimited power. Look, you want to be seen as a powerful king? You want to be seen as legitimate in your throne? Let a royal edict be issued from you. Why? Because until now, it was a democracy. The laws were edicted by legislative body, with the king having not really any veto to put, right? He didn't have a word to say about it. It's a little bit like a democracy and a parliament. The parliament would edict the laws, and the king didn't have a word to say. So now Haman is trying to bring King Ahasuerus to change that, right? And we understand that it hits his own agenda. He wants the king to decree rules that show the power of the husband, right? And we will see that it's in order for him personally to restrict his wife legally and find legitimate power in his house. But what is very funny is that all the strategy that he's now suggesting to the king will actually be the way the king will legitimately get rid of Haman at the end of the story. He doesn't realize that. And that's so funny, because he's trying to change the structure of power within the empire. And thanks to that, we will get rid of Haman very easily at the end.
Yeah.
So he doesn't know that he's actually creating a very difficult situation for himself.
Yeah. But I wanted to mention real quick, I was watching, I found just on YouTube, actually, the story of Esther. And I don't know who did this movie. It was like a mini movie. I don't know who did it, if it was a Jewish source or a Christian source or something else, but we were watching it, and it's really good for two reasons. One, I mean, it has the basic story that you expect. There were some artistic embellishments, obviously, some conversations that we don't know if they really happened or this type of thing. Overall, though, the story was good. But there were a few things that they changed. And it was so funny, because I was sitting with Dan watching it, and I would see something and go, oh, no, it doesn't happen like that in the story. And it was really funny. They did it for like artistic reasons, to make it more, smoother or whatever. But it was really funny. But setting aside all the artistic stuff, they had a lot of small details that you really only pick up on if you've studied it, like we're studying it.
Yeah.
And it was really well done, actually, because they were these tiny things that I picked up on because of this class that I probably wouldn't have noticed if I just watched it. But it was really, really good.
You will share with me maybe Bezrat Hashem after the class.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now it's true that it's interesting to understand really like how like Hakadosh Baruch Hu is actually using his pride and his desire for domination, right, in order to create a solution to the problem that he is at the end. Anyways, yeah. So let's go back to this verse 1 second. So we were saying that in order to flatter the king in his needful power and recognition, Haman suggests the king to issue an edict that will bypass the power of the parliament and will give the king the full authority, really like a dictator, right? On top of that, whatever decision made by the king should be written as the rules of Persia and Media, meaning that it could be used as a precedent in similar cases. So it means that even decisions that only had immediate consequences would thereby be permanent. So again, what is he doing? He will actually allow King Ahasuerus to kill Haman in the later chapters without needing the okay of anyone else. He will be hanged. Thanks to that decree that he passes, that he influences the king to pass. So it's really funny. We say, man plans and God laughs, right? It's exactly the case.
Yeah.
And what will be the first edict of that new dictatorial system? That Vashti never again appears before King Ahasuerus. And this is brilliant when you think about it, because if the king were only to kill Vashti, he could have appeared as a cruel or weak king. But if she's not allowed to ever show up in his presence, the people of his empire can imagine that maybe she tried to come in front and to disobey one more time. And that's why he had to apply the punishment. So it was very smart. But on top of that, he says also, he introduces the idea that there will be a successor to Queen Vashti. So he said, her royal estate will be given to another woman, better than she. So here Haman expresses 2 points. In choosing a successor to Vashti, the emphasis should not be placed on the lineage like before. Vashti was the granddaughter of a big emperor, but that's not what we're looking for now. We need the essential qualities of the woman herself. She should be better than Vashti. Then he also expresses another point, that the king should not be worried that the new queen be insubordinated, because she will have a very clear understanding of how disobeying to the king leads to harsh consequences. So don't be scared to take another queen, right?
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Sorry. When he determines this edict that Queen Vashti may never appear before, I know later in the story they talk about how you're not allowed to appear before the king if he hasn't called you. Does it come from that, or was that already the rule?
I'm not sure that it was already the rule before. I think it comes from that. That's the decree. And that's very interesting, because we will see how Esther actually created a whole strategy in order to appear in a different way.
Right.
And that also forced Esther to connect to Akadosh Baruch Hu in a very special way at that moment before entering. So we'll see that later. But yeah, you're right. It is the time. Exactly. So now we're about to finish that. We have 3 more verses on that chapter 20 now, verse 20, sorry. So when the king's decree which he proclaim, then when the king's decree, which he will proclaim, which is a very great one, will be known throughout the whole kingdom, wives will give honor to their husbands from the greatest to the smallest. Here he's not speaking to the king, obviously, but to him again. Like he's trying to sell that his kingdom will be considered a great one if he proclaims that. Why? Because all the men will be so happy. Their wives will be quiet down. He's a good seller, right? Mm-hmm. He's selling and comforting the king in his needs for power and recognition. But in reality, he's just following his own agenda again and again. Right. I don't know how his wife was, but she was very strong. Okay, so chapter 20, verse 21. This reply pleased the king and the officials, and the king followed Memuchan's suggestion. So here we see that Haman was such a good orator and manipulator that not only he had in his pocket the king, but all the other officials. And they all agreed to follow his suggestion. Of course, it's pleasant to the king to feel powerful and to have absolute authority, right? But why would the officials were willing to diminish their own power? Because here, they're bypassing their power. They agree that the king bypassed their own power. You know why? Because of the risk, that's what the Malbim explained, because of the risk of marital instability that it could create otherwise. So I think the Persian ladies were so strong that they were all scared,
Yeah.
right? They preferred to reduce their power, their legislative power, but to have more power in their house rather than being actually a good legislator, being able to rule, to judge, and to rule for their country, for the best of their country. They were very self-centered, right? Chapter 22 says, verse 22, sorry, says he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its script, which reminds us that it was not an empire that shared the same language, the same dialect, a lot of things were different. Like it was a very diverse empire, right? And to each people in its language, right? And that's very interesting. So the letter was sent to each people in his own language. But wait for the best, saying that every man should rule his own home and speak the language of his people, which means that the Manim explained what it means. It means that the king legislated and sent letters to each and every prince in their own language, that basically in any home, in any house of that empire, the man is all-powerful, dominating his wife, and that the wife, if she comes from a different country who doesn't have the same language, should abandon her own language to the benefit of the language, the native language of her husband. Why? Because again, that's exactly the situation where Haman is. And I personally know, because if I teach in English or if I teach in French, I don't have the same comfort. It's not very comfortable for me to teach in English compared to French, right? Imagine if you have a dispute with your husband in a language that you don't master. You're weaker. You don't have as much eloquence. It's not easy to prove your point.
Right.
So again, here we see that the purpose of Haman is to diminish the power of the women. It's amazing, because who is going to save the situation? A woman.
Woman. Yeah.
Right? How the people have a wrong perception of the Torah when they say, oh, women in the Torah, they are not really like powerful. What? It's not like that, on the contrary. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so for today, we're done. If you have any questions, comments, and next week we'll start chapter 2, which is about the encounter with Mordechai and Hadassah, who will become Queen Esther, and how she will be selected or abducted to become Queen Esther.
Okay, perfect. Okay. No, it's really good. I've read it a few times and I keep reading it because it's an amazing story. But yeah, I think it's good. It's good so far. I'm glad I could attend. I was so upset when I saw that. I thought, oh no, I'm not going to be able to be there. So this is great. Thank you so much. Let me ask you, since there's nobody else on the